My name is Rob Hack from the Hawaii Pacific Export Council. We're very excited to be having our annual Export University 101 program today, and we're extra excited because this is the first time in almost 3 years that we're having a live event at the Foreign Trade Zone at Pier 2. So before the pandemic, we would have the live events and live stream them via Zoom. And then during the pandemic, we were 100% online via Zoom. And now we're trying to get back to things the way they were pre-pandemic and doing these hybrid meetings. So bear with us today if there's a few technical glitches along the way, but I think we'll be fine. We have a great lineup of speakers. Just to remind everyone how Export University works is we put on a series of seminars every year for the past several years, sponsored by DBET and SBA, so we'd like to thank them very much for funding us to allow us to do this, as well as our one-on-one company mentoring sessions. But these seminars go back now 7 years, and we have a vast archive of those, which I'll show you later on YouTube, that have been recorded. And the Export University 101 program covers several different topics of interest to the exporter, such as legal, finance, marketing, IT and websites, cultural issues, logistics, what have you. So each of our speakers spends roughly 30 minutes today talking about a vast subject which could take hours and hours and hours to cover, even scratching the surface. So we have an archive of more specific videos on some of these topics that you can go look at if any of these are of interest to you. So the goal today is really just to expose you to some very high-level ideas of things that you should be thinking about if you're getting into exporting for the first time, or if you're already doing a little bit of exporting but you'd like to increase your market share in foreign markets. And just to be clear, when we talk about exporting, this is to a foreign country, not to the United States, not to the mainland, not to Guam or the Mariana Islands. This would be Japan, Korea, China, Germany, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, what have you. Okay? So with that, I'd like to get started, and we'll bring in Jamie Lum from DBET, who will talk about the HiSTEP program in general. And after Jamie, we'll jump right into the program with our first speaker.
So thank you, Rob. Aloha, good morning. I'm Jamie Lum with the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism. And I'm going to be talking about the HiSTEP program, or the Hawaii State Trade Expansion Program, which helps to support this morning's program, and as Rob mentioned, a series of other export training sessions that we work together with the Hawaii Pacific Export Council to put on. So we are the state recipient of this grant, which comes from the Small Business Administration. And the whole purpose of the program is an export development program. It's designed for companies that are new to export, so if you've never exported before, and programs like this will help expose you to what is required of a company that's looking into exporting, as well as those who are already exporting but looking to expand into either new markets or to expand into a country they may already be exporting to, but maybe have new products that they want to promote and sell in that market. So the three main components of our program is we have our export readiness, of which this morning's program is a part of that. We have what we call our Hawaii pavilions, and then we have our company assistance. So I'll go into each one a little bit further. First, to be eligible to be a part of HiSTEP, you have to meet some just minimum requirements of the federal definition of eligible small business concern. You have to be a small business, and 98% of the companies or something like that in Hawaii do meet that. You have to certify that you're not barred from receiving any federal funds. You have to be registered to do business in the state with the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, and then you also have to be registered with the Department of Taxation and have a general excise tax license. So those are the minimum requirements to be enrolled in this program. And I think all of the presentations this morning will be sent to you, so yeah, you'll get copies of this.
We'll send PDFs to everyone.
So starting with the export readiness program, so as Rob mentioned, we do work with HPEC to put on a series of seminars that are either export issue specific or market specific. And it's designed to give you information to help you, for those that are new, maybe put together an export plan. Those that may already have an export plan, maybe you need to refine it. So that's the purpose, as the name implies, get you ready for exporting. Another part of the export readiness is our one-on-one business advising. We do work with partner organizations like Rob's organization, HPEC, the Small Business Development Centers, the Women's Business Center, or in Hawaii, that's the Patsy T. Mink Center for Business and Leadership, with the Veterans Business Opportunity Center. And what we do is when you sign up for the program, which is no cost, you just enroll. If nothing else that you do in the program, we put you in touch with one of our partner organizations so you can have a one-on-one session that they can help you assess your business and find out a little bit more about what your exporting goals are, and talk a little bit about that and maybe some other issues within your business itself. But that at least helps you to kind of see where you're at, and then maybe they can suggest things either within the HiSTEP program or possibly outside of HiSTEP to help you. So again, all of this export readiness is just to give you the tools to be able to put together a solid export plan that you can follow going forward. So normally, we did have one last month, exporting agricultural products from Hawaii, and then we always start out with this Export University 101, and then we'll have a series which will be up on our website, which is invest.hawaii.gov. And you can get all of the information that I'm giving you, although you'll have a copy of this presentation, is also on our website. Our Hawaii pavilions are trade shows that we have selected that we think are beneficial for our companies, that we feel we can take a good number of companies to help them get into particular markets and with particular products. So what we do is we use, and we work with the Department of Agriculture, so they also have some shows that they're doing. We have FoodX coming up in March that we're doing together. But the whole purpose, again, is to bring Hawaii companies together. We want to make it affordable for companies to be at these large trade shows, because it would cost you probably about, just for the trade show itself, maybe $7,500 to $10,000 if you went in on your own. We subsidize the cost of the trade show booth, and we provide the standard furniture, translators that float around if you need it, et cetera. So again, to make it affordable for companies, and then also the Hawaii brand, because we have a Hawaii pavilion, and buyers are attracted to, it's a very powerful way of marketing our Hawaii products. So here's a list of the trade shows that we have on the calendar for this year. We have one that the Department of Agriculture is doing this month, Gulf Food, which is in Dubai. And then we primarily are in Japan, as you can see, but we do have also in March the Natural Products Expo West, which is in Anaheim. So we do recruit when the time comes, several months before the show, we'll put out an announcement and we'll recruit companies that are interested. We do charge a small participation fee, but again, it's a quarter of the cost of what you would spend if you were going to the trade show on your own. And then the third component of our program is the company assistance. And let me just start out by saying we actually have already closed the applications for this year. We normally put the applications out in November or so, and then we give about a 2-month window to apply. So, so what I can say is, for those of you out there that might, you can be preparing for the next year, put together a good export plan, because that's key to the committee's decision. And you would submit a proposal and there's an evaluation committee. That's key to what the evaluation committee will look at. What is your plan? What market do you want to go into? Why do you want to go into it? Do you have any data that shows that there's there's a demand for your product in that market? What the viability is? Do you have sales targets, et cetera, those kinds of things. So. So we do have 2 categories. We give out funds to new-to-export companies up to $5,000, and then for market expansion companies up to $15,000. And then the additional requirement, if you're a market expansion company, is we require that you have at least $200,000 in revenue from the previous year in order to apply. And the reason for that is exporting does take an investment. And so we just want the company to be sure that they are ready and they have the resources to really go forward in making and being successful in exporting. Oh, that last point, it is a reimbursement program, so you would have to spend the money up front and then put in for a reimbursement. And these are some of the allowable expenses. So especially during the pandemic, when we couldn't travel, when there weren't trade shows in person, a lot of companies turned to direct to consumer, so e-commerce. So funds can be used to set up your e-commerce and website expenses. Again, remembering that this is for international sales. So you'd be looking at things like translating your website, being able to take international payments, and those kinds of things, putting in the tariffs and duties and building that in. So those kinds of expenses associated with that. You can also use it for international marketing, and a lot of people did digital marketing, social media. You can use it for those types of things. And then as well as now we're getting back to some of the more traditional types of ways of helping to promote your exports and through trade shows. So you can use it for airfare. You can use it for trade show costs. And I would also note, it does not have to be the trade shows that we have for Hawaii Pavilions. If there are other trade shows that are more advantageous for your company and your product, then we would encourage you to do that. You can also use it to ship products to and from the trade show. You can use it to ship sample products if you get a potential buyer that just wants a small order. You can use it for, I list Gold Key service specifically, but the U.S. Department of Commerce has a number of services that they offer through their offices, their international offices that are located either at the embassies or consulates around the world, whose jobs are to help U.S. companies do business in that particular country. And they do have some fees that they charge, so money can be used for that. Compliance testing. If you have a product that needs to be certified before it can be sold in a particular market, you can use it to do the required testing. And then other things, you can use it for export research, trade credit insurance, programs, foreign buyer credit reports, and you can even use it for, if you have a consultant that is very knowledgeable about the type of product you have, the market that you're going into, and it's a service that's not provided by the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. Commercial Service, you can use it to pay for a consultant. So that's just a list of the eligible. expenses. What we are looking for to do with this program is really to help increase the number, the dollar amount of exports that are of Hawaii products and services that are going out into the global marketplace. We want to increase the number of companies that are also doing business internationally. And then we also want to get into more foreign markets. We want more of our products, Hawaii products and services, to be able to reach more foreign countries. So let's see, what else do I have here? Okay. As I said, this is all of the partners that we work with, and we couldn't do this program without them. So we're very thankful to all of our partners. And that's our website again, invest.hawaii.gov. Under exporting, you can find all the information. So if you are interested in HiSTEP, you can go onto our website and fill out a registration form. As I said, there's no cost. It doesn't obligate you to participate in anything. But what it will do at the very minimum is we will put you in touch with one of our partner organizations to have a one-on-one consultation. And there's my contact information as well as two of my colleagues. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Our first speaker of the day is Elizabeth Chan, Dr. Elizabeth Chan. She is the CEO of the Global Risk Mitigation Foundation in Honolulu. She's also an attorney at the law offices of David F. Day. And she's a board member of the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, and we're very thrilled to have her speaking today about generally legal issues that exporters may come across when they're first getting involved in exporting. People get very nervous and they contact me and say, well, when do I hire an attorney? How do I get a contract going? What do I need for a distributor? Do I need a Japanese attorney? What have you? So Elizabeth can share some of her insights on that, and she would be a great attorney locally if you ever need anything internationally.
So today I'm going to be giving a quick overview on some exporting basics. I'm assuming that because you're all exporters and you're sitting in this room, that everybody has a company set up. So we're going to bypass the basic LLC corporate setup and go straight to some basics for exporting. So if we could go to the next slide. So we're going to start off on the next slide with international legalities and some international intellectual property rights. So a couple of quick overviews on this. Patent law protects inventions. So you have a country that has a patent for an inventor via patent application. Most of what we'll be looking at with exporters would be trademark law, where we have a word, symbol, name that identifies and distinguishes your product. So the trademarks have to be registered through our USPTO first. And then we use a process called the Madrid Protocol to have it registered in foreign countries such as Japan, Korea, or wherever you're intending to market your product. One catch with the Madrid Protocol is that for each trademark registration or each country that you intend to do business in, you have a separate registration for that country. So you need to do a little bit of advanced planning on this one. Once you have your trademark registered in the US, then it's a question of, do you want to enter the Japanese market, the Korean market, the Emirati market, for example? And each of those countries will require looking at the Madrid Protocol database and figuring out, okay, these countries are all signatories on the Madrid Protocol, so I can use that to apply for a trademark in that country. Once you decide that, then you have to file an application for registration in that country using the Madrid Protocol. And every country has a separate filing fee. I believe the filing fee for Korea is around $400. Japan is a little different, and you will need to apply for each of those. The good news is that this is one application. The bad news is that it's a separate filing fee for each country. So That's the trademark basics on international trademark registration. We'll be less concerned with copyright law, which protects original works of authorship, and that would be computer software, other intellectual writing. If you have a manual for your product, then you would probably use copyright law to protect that.
Elizabeth, this is Rob. I'd just like to chime in for a second and
Okay.
advise our companies to pay close attention to this trademark issue, because we've had several Hawaii companies that have not registered their trademarks, and they lose them to an agent or distributor in Japan or Korea, and it's very difficult to get those back. So this is something to take very seriously before you start your exporting adventure. And if you have any questions at all, please contact Elizabeth in the future. Sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, actually, Rob. David and I have had some clients who have registered in the US and then used Japanese trademark law to register their trademark separately in Japan. But because there were some difficulties with the Japanese trademark registration, they did not register the same trademark that they're registered under in the US. So we do recommend using the Madrid Protocol, because that will get you the same trademark that you're registered with in the US. And start early with trademark registration. It does take some time. For the Madrid Protocol registrations, you need to have an existing US trademark that's registered. And the USPTO, the last time I checked, let's see, how long did it take? It took us about 2 years to get a trademark registered because of COVID backlogs. So government agencies are still working through the backlog right now, and definitely plan ahead for this issue. And the other problem with intellectual property rights is that just because you're registered doesn't mean that you are absolutely protected. You do have to actively defend your marks and your intellectual property. We've had another client who had a patent, a US patent, and it was stolen by a Chinese company. Our client won the lawsuit, shockingly, in China, and then couldn't enforce it. So it's the same as losing the patent anyways. He lost the intellectual property to the Chinese company. One of our fellow deck companies over in North Carolina has ended up building a failsafe into his hardware. So if somebody tries to take the product apart to figure out how it's constructed, it sort of blows up the software. So you can't actually take his product apart without destroying it and purchasing a new item from him, which costs something like $50,000. So, all right, I think we've got intellectual property pretty much covered. I do think this is probably one of the most important parts. So we'll go to negotiating contracts. I know we're going to go into culture a little bit more thoroughly later, but a quick overview on cultural sensitivity, because we do deal with this in negotiation very often. Gifts are okay in Asia. Bribery is not. So do be aware of the potential for corruption, but dining, entertainment, and gifts are so much a part of culture negotiation that in our own negotiations, David and I have seen entertainment as the single most critical element of negotiating a contract. Sometimes we can negotiate something over dinner that's put into writing at a later point, or at least the relationship is laid into place so that we can deal with the details of a contract later. We do notice that handshakes are equally important, and we will argue a little bit on acceptable dress. We're fans of clean shirts, slacks, suits, ties, and so on. David has a rule about wearing local business dress. So in the Philippines, he'll wear a barong. I disagree with that a little bit, but that is more because in some cases you want to fit into the local culture through dress. In some cases, maybe it's better to be the foreigner. Universally, an aloha shirt is a great choice, in my opinion. It makes it very clear that you're from Hawaii, and it's acceptable for negotiating and creates a more relaxed atmosphere, in my opinion. Next slide, please.
I agree with you on that, by the way. I think if you're a Hawaii company and you're trying to market your Hawaii-ness, if that's a word, it is now, that really helps get the message across.
Yeah, we've had a client who made a signature of aloha shirts and a blazer. So that really got across the Hawaii product, selling Hawaii products. So that worked really well. So we have a couple of examples on business deals in Asia, specifically here. Actually, I think this applies to the Middle East as well, where it's relationship driven. There's a trust factor that has to be created first. So much of that relationship is built over entertainment, gifts. Rob's got a great slide on this at some point that I've seen before, and talking about omiyage. When we do contract negotiations in Asia, David and I usually end up carrying about a suitcase worth of gifts for people that serve as a great icebreaker. We have some people, some lawyers, counterparts on the other side who remember what gifts we brought and have actually mentioned them at future meetings, especially food gifts. Food gifts are universally popular in Asia. The only catch with the relationship-driven contracts is that, or relationship-driven agreements, is that it takes time to build that relationship and that deal. And as Americans, we do find it a little unnerving to have a handshake contract where you're building a relationship, negotiating it over dinner, and you're not quite sure exactly what the actual deal is. As business people, we have to balance that against contracts where you have a strict contract that articulates what happens in the future and laying out enforcement remedies. So it's a really fine line between what you've laid out over dinner the prior night and the business deal that has to be written. And sometimes you get questions of, well, don't you trust us? And the answer is, yes, we trust you, but we're also paranoid, so we need something in writing that can lay out the business deal going forward. So for exporters, just be aware of this really fine line. You can create a wonderful relationship with your counterparts, but at the end of the day, you have to have a contract that lays out what your deal is and what the terms of the deal are. You can have a slightly softer contract and maybe tone down some of the language, but you still need something in writing. As lawyers, we do try to balance that relationship created contract with the snapshot of the future that we try to do in a contract. We do have to tone down some of the language a little bit or make it a little bit softer, but we also try to make sure that clients' enforcement remedies are laid into place so that you have some sort of fallback plan if the contract doesn't happen the way you think it's going to happen. In an ideal world, yes, everything will be perfect. Your contract will be perfect. The product will be perfectly marketed on the other side. Your importer will be making their sales targets, but you do need some sort of a fallback. One way to handle this is also to have a softer trial period so that you have a dating period with your importer and you can get out of it if it's not working out and you have an alternative fallback. So next slide. So negotiation is kind of like an iceberg. You have the tip of the iceberg, which you can see, but underneath you have underlying layers and issues that arise in the course of the negotiation that you have to work out. Next slide. Okay, so your positions are going to be what they're saying on the other side, and interests on the bottom, you can't figure it out. Do they have counteroffers? Language, and underneath you have language issues, cultural problems, watch body language, and look at relationships in the room as well. Oh, and smooth negotiations. I think we can skip the corruption part. We'll get into that later. So obviously, this is where the relationship comes in handy. If you have a cooperative spirit with your some sort of cooperation or cooperative relationship already developed with your counterparts, it makes the negotiation a lot easier. I would also jump to the third one where your goals have to be clear. What do you want out of this negotiation? And manage your expectations a little bit. You're not going to go into a market and in the first month or in the first week, you'll come out of a trade show with your contract for exporting, I don't know, 60 containers of chocolate covered macadamia nuts. It might be something small, like you'll have in your first month, you'll export about 10 cases of, I don't know, Hawaii manufactured noodles. Keep it small, keep it manageable, and don't go for the entire shipload of Hawaii products in the first month or so of exporting. Try to keep the number 4, we can't stress enough how important it is to have clear communications. Personally, even if I speak the language in a local environment, I'll always have a translator. You don't want to make a mistake with negotiations, and you don't want to misunderstand a nuance in language. With cultural biases, it's something to be aware of. I know we're covering that in greater detail later as well. Next slide, please. International dispute resolution. We cannot stress enough how important dispute resolution mechanisms are, because this is your fallback plan. If something goes horrifically wrong with your export contracts, export deals, you have to have a dispute resolution mechanism written into the contract. I don't care how much your counterpart argues about this. We'll just, likely in Asia, it'll be, well, we'll just sit down and talk about it. Do not go for that, please. The other warning is, please do not go for a foreign court. This means that you will be subject to your local jurisdiction. You have to have foreign lawyers who can appear in that court, and you will be working in somebody else's playground. Keep it in sort of our own backyard, and the best happy medium we can offer is to rely on arbitration law, which allows for reciprocal enforcement of international arbitration awards. These absolutely need to be written into your contracts before you sign, and most people skip this particular option. Thanks. Your other option is mediation, where you have a neutral third party to help put the pieces of your contract or rebuild the relationship together. The problem with mediation is that it's not enforceable. So what we usually recommend is something that's a little bit in between, where you can have simultaneous mediation and arbitration. If the mediation doesn't work, then it rolls over into arbitration. So there's a fallback position if you can't have a friendly resolution. And sometimes the relationship really does fall apart to that extent. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so your basic contract fundamentals are much the same with exporting as they would be in doing business here. Negotiate your deal points, figure out the language of your contract. What language is the contract going to be written in? And then you'll want to pick the choice of law. We do recommend US law, but specifically Hawaii law, because that's a form that we're all familiar with. But this may be a sticking point with your counterpart. You'll likely need foreign legal counsel if you're dealing with their particular country's law, especially if you are going to be working under, say, Japanese law. So in that case, account for higher legal costs. You'll need a US lawyer working in coordination with a, say, Japanese lawyer as well. So please always include an arbitration or ADR clause. ADR is short for alternative dispute resolution, and this means that you get to stay out of court as much as possible. Court is like, whenever you have litigation, this is like a guarantee for higher legal bills and higher costs. Try to keep it out of court as much as possible. So this is why you always include alternative dispute resolution clauses.
Quick question, sorry,
yeah.
because I know somebody will ask this question, so I'm going to preempt them.
Okay.
In your firm, you would have partners or predetermined partnerships for different countries where your clients could be involved. So they would come and talk to you and say, hey, we're interested in doing something in Japan or Korea or India. And you would already have partnerships set up with attorneys in those countries. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So our office, because we deal primarily with international business law, we have existing relationships, networks, and offices that we can refer people to in the event of litigation. Generally, you do not need foreign legal counsel for most business transactions unless you are in litigation or if there's a dispute that is being arbitrated in that particular language, or you have under, say, Japanese law. So if you can do it under, and there are certain rules for international business arbitration, so it depends really on what you can negotiate as far as choice of law. We've written some slightly creative ADR clauses that we're trying to find happy mediums for everybody, because obviously your counterpart's going to want their law and their counsel in their courts. So you get to pick things with alternative dispute resolution clauses. You can say, you can pick any combination of things, like the number of arbitrators or mediators involved, your choice of law, where you want to negotiate this, or where you want to pick the arbitrate the dispute, and what language you want to deal in. So one way to work around this is to pick a neutral location. Say Singapore, for example, has a great alternative dispute resolution center for this purpose. So you can have a neutral arbitrator, and then everybody pick English, for example. And choice of law, you could pick U.S. business law or Hawaii law, or if you do Japanese law, better be familiar with that, in which case we will need foreign legal counsel as a counterpart if the choice of law is Japanese law. But you can also pick Hawaii law. That's an option as well. So sometimes you can negotiate various points. I think we had a contract recently that had Singapore dispute resolution. Choice of law was actually Hawaii law, and then the language of the dispute resolution, I think, was Japanese for that one. So we're trying to keep everybody happy, and we'll need a translator, but a translator is cheaper than another lawyer. So sometimes that's a little bit of a happy medium to get the negotiation, get the clause that you want. We thought in that case that having it enforced under Hawaii law was a better choice for our clients. So you can kind of fiddle with that a little bit, compromise a little on the language, and then you have Singapore as the forum. With Zoom, you can do a little bit more as to location. So next slide. So as we've mentioned before, arbitration allows for more flexibility. You can do, this is really different from a trial, and so it's a little bit more efficient and generally less expensive for our clients. Next slide. And we can skip through that. So this is sort of a generic sample of an arbitration clause. Controversies or claim shall be determined by arbitration administered by the American Arbitration Association, which has international arbitration rules, or you can pick the Singapore International Arbitration rules or similar. And they're all roughly the same. They're designed to make business negotiations quicker, easier, and keep things out of court to keep expenses down for companies. Next slide. So here's where you get to the little tricky bits. You can do 1 or 3 arbitrators, and just remember that you have to pay for the arbitrators. So the companies usually split the cost on arbitrators, so we do suggest maybe 1. You do want to have an odd number so that you don't have a split decision on this. And then you have the place of arbitration. We've gotten lucky sometimes and got to Honolulu arbitration location. Language was English. English is a pretty good bet because most people are okay with dealing in English for arbitration or legal matters. Nobody's going to pick Arabic for an arbitration yet, unless you're dealing in an Arab country with Arab law, so this gets a little bit trickier. Next slide. So here's a little bit about bribery. This is an old article, of course, but there's a lot of crackdown on foreign bribery. Unfortunately, it's a really fine line between culture and corruption in some countries. Next slide. So you do not want to rely on your local partners. We've had people who have been dealing with in certain countries, and their local partners have been slightly corrupt. So you want to watch out for corruption. A lot of the countries are currently doing anti-corruption crackdowns, and rightly so. You can use the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is a U.S. statute, as a shield, in which you just tell them that you will be in serious trouble if that happens. And please just say no. Gift giving's okay, but don't say no. And if you are involved in corruption's part, just don't. It will get you into a lot of trouble, and I think that goes without saying on this particular issue. There's some other things you can use to get out of that, but I think it's easier to have a clean line, and you need to be absolutely sure as to your own ethics and figure out what's corruption and what's not. If you're bringing small gifts for people, that's not corruption. It's a cultural issue. But if you're talking about bribery, systemic bribery, it's probably best not to be in that situation overall. It's not worth the export business. Next slide. And we can jump to the next slide. And that is about it. Any questions on your end, Rob?
No, that's great. I don't see anybody has typed in any questions, but I'm sure they will be sending you emails about it or calling you, and I'll be sending around PDFs to all of the registrants with this contact information. So I'm sure that you'll get some. Let me ask the live audience: is there anybody that has a question for Elizabeth before she signs off? Okay, great. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you. We have your contact, and I'm sure people will be calling you. But thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was great.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Okay, our next speaker will be Kanzo Nara. He's from the Imagine Web Creation Company in Honolulu, and his expertise is building and advising on bilingual or multilingual websites, especially when I say bilingual, it's Japanese and English, but also on the social media, which I think a lot of our companies who are new to exporting need to be doing more of. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kanzo.
Well, thank you, Rob, for the introduction. Thank you for having me. As mentioned before, my name is Kanzo Nara. I'm from Imagine Web Creation. I've been doing bilingual websites or multilingual websites here in Hawaii for about 15 years or so, mostly the Asian market. So I will be talking about bilingual websites and, from the get-go, how to get started, what you need, and so on. So first thing you need for a website, obviously, is a domain. A lot of my clients take the wrong foot when they start off with purchasing a domain. So I want to really focus on this section to start off with. First, there's two differences in having an international market website. One is multilingual. This is, for example, a Canadian business with an English or French version website that they do marketing within the same country. Next is multi-regional, which is, going back to the same example, for Canada, US, to have different languages and different targets that you'll be shipping internationally. So we'll be focusing kind of on both today, the multilingual part and the multi-regional part. Okay, so getting into actually what domains you want to purchase to start off your website. The traditional one is a .com. I'm sure everybody who has a business has a website already and it's a .com. But the question arises when you want to make a secondary website for a new market is what domain do you want? Popular one in Japan is .co.jp. This is a very trusted domain in Japan, and it costs a little bit more. The cost is about, I think, $200, which is about 20 times more what average domain costs. But for this one, you need to be a legal entity in Japan. So it's a little bit hard to obtain. If you have branches internationally, this is a good domain. The third one, where you see here is jp.yourdomain, is called a subdomain. This is actually a free domain you can add onto your existing domain, and it tells your users also that you're at a different language. What you do not want to do, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is if you can see at the bottom left is you have your website domain.com and then you do a /jp. So what this does is this creates a website within a website, and I'll go into more detail on why you do not want to do this. Okay, this is the official guidelines provided by Google. There's 3 types here. So we have a dedicated country-specific domain. For example, this one will be doing example.jp. This is it has a geo-targeting element to this. So right off the bat, it tells Google that this website should be displayed to customers in Japan. Large corporations do this, like Toyota, Honda, because car prices are different from country to country, and they want to make their consumer look at the correct site. This is a very effective method of doing this. The second one is adding a subdomain, which is at the beginning portion of it. This one is easy to set up because you don't need to purchase or re-register anything, and it allows the website to be treated as a separate website. So it's 2 separate websites acting off of one domain. So Google can use this to geo-target and make sure the correct domain and language is provided to the user when they search it. The third one is a subdirectory, and this one is not recommended by Google. As you can see, there's more cons than there are pros. The reason most people go this direction is because they already have a website. They want to add on information to an existing website, and this is also the cheapest way. So it looks appealing at first, but what a lot of times my customers who come to me after a couple years of doing this is they spend so much time and resources developing their bilingual website under a subdirectory within a website that they're not getting very much traction or hits from this. So they spend so much time and energy on this after a couple years, and then they have to redo everything on a separate website. So you want to make sure you start off with a clean domain that targets the audience you're looking for. Okay, looking at site designs for international aspect is quite different here in the US, and I'd like to show a few examples. We'll be focusing on the Japanese website. This is actually also particular for Korea and Chinese websites. First thing is the content is very heavy. There's a lot more content. One of the reasons for this is the Chinese and Japanese characters helps condense paragraphs and wording, so it's a lot more effective to put more words into your design, into the website. Also, the consumers like to have package deals, and they like to be provided with spoon-fed information instead of building their own product or packages. The next one is banner ads. This is very popular, especially in Japan and China. Banner ads are kind of like magazine ads. They're tiny box square things that appear inside magazines traditionally. But the website design in Japan and China like to incorporate this into design, and even in 2023, this is still an effective way of using banners in their website. So I'd like to go through a couple examples of web design. Everybody knows that McDonald's is this internationally recognized US company. They probably don't really visit their website, but we know their branding and their advertising. So this is the US official web design. This is their front page. So they have one picture here, their logo, a few header menus, and some brief content. Very simple. Showcasing another international design, this is India's web design. This one gets even simpler. There's a logo and just their catchphrase to their company. Okay, now going to the McDonald's site in Japan. Unfortunately, I can't show you the entire website because there's so much information. It doesn't fit on this PowerPoint. But right off the bat, you can tell here that this is a slideshow that has 4 images, and this one image has 3 images inside. This will be what we call the banner ad before. So it's a square box that has like an ad campaign, has so much information in it. If you scroll down to this, which it's not shown on the presentation, it has seasonal packaging, Mother's Day special, Valentine's Day special, whatnot. There's always a special and package marketing for actually selling the same product, but calling it in a different way and packaging it differently, even though it's the same product. This is another international branding that I like to remind people here in the US sometimes. Everybody's seen the logo on the left. This is a logo for the US Red Cross. It's internationally recognized, but if you look at the right one, this is the Red Cross's logo for the Middle East. They use a crescent moon. There's a lot of cultural meaning to this, but sometimes you need to keep in mind what colors you want to use, what shapes might be offensive or not offensive. For example, like in Japan, a deep purple color is only reserved for like the royal family, the imperial family. So you don't want to go too traditional and be offensive by using the color of the royal family. Okay. Marketing and SEO for international markets. Marketing can be always broken down into these 3 parts. We have pay-per-click, search engine optimization, and SMS. When breaking it up into even further into 2 parts, you have organic marketing and paid marketing. So the organic marketing would be the SEO and social network. This is something you need to build within your site by creating things like natural content or more product details. Social media is something you can do for free with your staff, or you have a schedule on posting information, and you will organically generate traffic to your website. The pay-per-click part is advertising, so you will have to have advertising budget for this. I'm sure many of you have already tried this to some extent, but depending on what country you're at, different search engines have different share market values, so you want to make sure you're spending your money on the correct place. For example, Yahoo is still the largest search engine in Japan. Even though the search engine itself is developed and maintained by Google, people still visit the Yahoo website. This is 2022 e-commerce sales by country. It changed a little bit since 2021. China was actually under 1 trillion in 2021, but they've gone to 1.5 trillion just in the past year. So it's a humongous jump from China and their e-commerce. The U.S. has increased a bit. They're still in second place at 857 billion. Big change for Japan. Japan moved up from number 5 to number 3 within the year, going up to 241 billion. Looking at other Asia markets, we have South Korea, India, and Indonesia is new into this international market. And Indonesia is actually the same as Canada right now. We both have a 59 billion. And then we have UK and Germany. Yeah, this is the graph of how it looks right now. In 2021, global spending for e-commerce was 4.9 trillion. In 2022, it went up to 5.5 trillion. So that's another big jump. And the US and China is actually about 50%, or actually more than 50% of that share. But close third place is Japan. So that's a market you definitely want to expand to if you have the resources, the time, and the commitment to do so. So we have our domain, we have our website. Now we want to get into more detailed marketing. And I know everybody has a vast variety of products. What you want to be careful is what keywords do your product have associated with it. A lot of times it's not the keyword that you think it is, because A different language calls it something different, or they have a different catchphrase for it. Even within the English language, sometimes you have the professional term, and then you have a layman's term. And then when you get into languages like Japanese and Korean and Chinese, they have a different spelling of characters. For example, Japanese have kanji, hiragana, and katakana. So this isn't something you can just put into Google Translate and get the correct word, even if you know what the correct keyword is. So you want to make sure you're using the correct character when you're trying to market or even just inform your users of that product. Like example here, the Chinese character at the bottom, and this is hiragana here. The one at the very right is katakana. They all mean the same thing, that means travel, which is a very big keyword for here in Hawaii. Okay, pay-per-click and SEM in Japan. This is a very effective method just because I like doing pay-per-click because they give you so much more data than just Google Analytics.
Sorry, Kanzo-san, can you remind everybody what does SEM mean?
Okay, SEM is search engine marketing. So it is a paid method of marketing on search engines, which is same as pay-per-click. Just pay-per-click makes it more easy to understand how much you're spending on each campaign. So the reason I like doing SEM and pay-per-click so much is that you get so much information more than just analytics. I'm sure many of you who have websites already are familiar with Google Analytics and like looking at it, but the pay-per-click campaign gives you so much more information, especially on the user. Well, it gives you more information on gender, age group, geo-targeting. So if you're, let's say, targeting in Japan or China, you want to know if you're marketing to major cities like Tokyo or Beijing, or you're looking for more rural areas in the countryside. So it gives you a more clearly defined parameter of how your marketing campaigns do. And secondly, it gives you can maximize your budget in many ways. One of them is you can control the time of day your ad runs. This is very important if you understand who your consumers are and what age group they are or what they're doing. Once again, location and region is very important. Gender, age. You can even run ads based on income. This is only based on Facebook right now, but in Facebook, you can make sure your ad runs to a specific bracket of income. So let's say if you're in real estate, you can set your ad to run for people who only make more than, let's say, $95,000 a year, and it gets placed in those people's Facebook feeds.
Let's stay on this for just 1 second because I'd like people
Yes.
to really understand this because it's much different than life in Hawaii. When you think about it, our live audience here today almost assuredly drove here. They didn't take the subway, they didn't take the train, they didn't take the bus, most likely. However, throughout Asia, but let's just focus on where most of our exporters are looking at Japan. Japan, 90-something% of the commuters, maybe 97% or more of the commuters every day are following a very strict schedule that they follow every day. They take the same trains, subways, and buses. They leave home at the same time every day. They get to work at the same time every day. Then in the afternoon, they leave pretty much the same time every day, take the same trains and buses and subways back home, etc. My point being that you have a captive audience during these public transportation rides, let's call it rush hour, that our companies need to take advantage of, because if you're on the subway for an hour or 90 minutes, what are you going to do? You're obviously going to be on your phone, maybe playing games or watching videos or what have you, but you're probably shopping also. And this is the time to take advantage of that. And I think that that's really where Kanzo's going with this slide, is just showing that you can target your market in very specific times, and those are likely commuting times. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you, Rob. No, that's a very important part, and I'd like to add on to that a little bit. Is So in Japan, people spend so much time on the public transportation that a lot of people carry a secondary battery for their smartphones. They use up their battery within a day. So they carry an additional battery with them, and most people have them on them. Another interesting fact about this commute that goes into the sales market in Japan is Japan has the highest rate of book sales anywhere in the world, meaning that people like to buy books and read them while they're in transit. And this is, kind of for the maybe more the my generation and up that actually reads the book, but it's still everybody has a smartphone and they spend a lot of time on their smartphone while in transit. Okay, so I know social media is a huge part of marketing these days. What I want to emphasize here is you want to make sure you're going after the correct social media platform when you're going to put in your resources and effort to try to build up your fan base. So globally, Facebook is still really big at 2.4 billion. You have YouTube, which is second, WhatsApp, WeChat, Instagram, and so on. But if you look at Japan, it's totally different. Facebook isn't even in here anymore. Line is the number one app, the social media platform in Japan. And a lot of businesses use this as kind of an online chat system for their websites too. YouTube is the same second, but Twitter makes an appearance here in Japan. It's still very popular. So making, based on what country you're going into, you want to make sure you're using the correct platform to build your audience and advertise or inform about your product or service. This started about 10 years ago, but since 10 years ago, the web users in Japan have fallen over 80% on smartphones. So your initial search and secondary search, over 80% is going to be on smartphones. Okay, so this goes back to kind of what Rob and I was talking about before. So you want to kind of make sure you know when and where your users are looking at your website. The big part is going to be in transit. And in between, most people are working, but Japanese companies tend to have a very strict policy on web browsing while they're at work. So you won't see Japanese office workers, posting something on Facebook or just browsing because they finished their project during. A lot of times, some companies even have strict policies where they track the movement of where you're browsing. Sometimes they even block popular websites to prevent their workers from spending additional time on it. So you really want to focus on people, their free time, which is when they're in transit, lunchtime, and then in the evening. And how this works for like an e-commerce flow is most people will be looking for something in transit. They will research it during lunchtime. And during the evening time is when people with desktops tend to start doing their web browse searching. And this is when the purchasing happens. So it's good to have information you can show people while they're busy in transit or outdoors for your first and secondary searches. But the tertiary search might be on a desktop, which is about 52% right now. This is where you can show even more information. So it's good to have a responsive design where you can consolidate information for the first and secondary searches, and then really go full-blown information for the tertiary search. And creating a landing page, this is something for mobile users that really comes in hand. And I want to give a couple guidelines here that what you want to keep in mind, whatever platform you're using, WordPress, Shopify, or anything, is you have 2 seconds to grab the user's attention. One good thing about Japan or Korea is that they have the highest internet speed in the world right now. So you get to add a lot more media information, a lot more design. And you know that the page will get read in faster than here in the US, so that's a good thing. You want to showcase most of your important information within 2 swipes. If you have to scroll any longer than that, they might not find what they're looking for. They might leave your page. You want to have visual effects at the top, your message or product info within that 2 swipe and 2 second window. So just remember this 2 second and 2 swipe. Okay, I'd like to go into some things that might help your website to increase e-commerce for like a globalization market. First one is currency converter. Uh, you can make buying internationally easier if you can have local currency converters. Obviously, it makes more sense for people to decide if they want to purchase or not. One thing you want to keep in mind and be upfront with your user is that even though the currency converter is showing something today, when your customer purchases something, that merchant service won't get read into their card until a couple days later. So that's when the actual currency converter changes. Usually it's not a big difference, but you want to be upfront with them and tell them there might be a slight difference from when they actually purchase something to when it gets displayed on their end of the credit card. Language support on your website. Obviously, it's ideal to have a bilingual staff, especially for responses on contact forms or going back to that social media of line. If you have somebody who speaks that language who can respond to your customers sooner, obviously that will directly relate to better sales and better support, and just service wise, it's nice to have. And if you don't have a bilingual staff, what you might want to consider is creating an extensive FAQ section, a frequently asked question, because a lot of times you kind of know the questions that are already coming in all the time, and you want to, portray this on your website in an effective way, not just by having like a FAQ section, but once somebody goes to the contact form, you can have a section at the top of the contact form saying, "Have you reviewed this FAQ section?" So try to provide information even before they ask. A chat feature is nice. I know there's a lot of AIs out there. It gets a little bit tricky when you get into bilingual AIs, but depending on your service, you might want to look more into that. For Japan, Korea, and China, @line, the previous social media I was talking about, is a good feature, and actually it's a free chat system that you can use. It's been very popular, especially with restaurants and small businesses in Japan. A lot of people can make reservations over line, or they can ask a question and they can reply right away because the staff has it on in their phone and they're walking around with it. So it's a good tool to have. These are some of the reasons why people may not buy on your site. One thing is 65% say if it's not in their language, they won't even bother. 67% say they tolerate mixed languages. User online machine translations, 66%, probably copy and paste or put the plugin that translates the site to see what it's saying. So this is kind of, the in-between before people who have a bilingual site. But you can reduce this or increase this all to 100% if you have a bilingual or a multilingual website. Okay, that is the gist of it.
Thank you very much, Konzo. It's great seeing you. We really appreciate all you do for us here at the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, and you're always available to do these webinars with us. And I would encourage our audience to go to the Hawaii Pacific Export Council YouTube page. Our archive there, we have some past presentations from Konzo, which are even more detailed about IT issues and websites and social media, particularly regarding Japan. But all of the lessons that he talked about, even though they're sort of Japan specific, they could be used for Brazil in Portuguese or German or wherever you're trying to sell your product. So please look into that. And then if you need any help with your bilingual, multilingual websites or social media, please contact Konzo-san with that. So thank you again, Konzo. Great seeing you.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Okay, bye. Our next speaker, I like to refer to him as the godfather of shipping in Hawaii. That's Brian Suzuki from Hawaii Air Cargo. He has more knowledge on this. Let's say he's forgotten more than most of us will ever know. He's been doing this for several years, and I think our Hawaii exporters can learn so much from Brian, but getting in touch with him before you start to sell your products internationally, that would be extremely helpful. So you can learn a lot from a freight forwarder by meeting with them before you start shipping, so that they understand your packaging. They understand, for example, if you're shipping product that needs to be chilled, or obviously if you're shipping food products or plants. There's a lot of things that need to happen in the whole logistics chain, and a person like Brian can make things so much easier for you. I find that our Hawaii companies wait far too long to get the logistics people involved in the process, and I really believe we have to get our companies working on that much more proactively. So with that, I'm going to share Brian's presentation and ask Brian to come up.
I just like to welcome all of you here, and those on Zoom, please follow along, and you'll be getting a copy. But I just wanted to start off by saying that as far as shipping is concerned, before you even meet your customer, you should try to know what is going to cost you to send your products to that destination. Too many people, let's say in Japan, or China, or Korea, I've been to many trade shows, and so when Jamie brought up about the trade show, it's really important for you to try to be there, see who you're up against, your competition, but also when you go over there, people say, I don't want to buy from Hawaii because, like say in Tokyo, it's almost a 9-hour flight. So in their mind, they're saying, you can't ship small shipments by boat because they don't accept, shipping doesn't accept ocean freight, doesn't accept less than container loads. You got to go through a consolidation or ship whole containers. And that can be expensive if you only want to do a sampling of the product. So at any rate, we have two modes of transportation, and I just wanted to mention that ocean, again, is one method. We all know coming in from the mainland, we have all ocean freight going out. Guam, even Japan, we have ocean freight going out that way. And I'm just going to go through these slides really quickly. You'll be getting copies, but I also mentioned I want to bring up air. And air can be via passenger flight. It can also be on all cargo carriers, also freight forwarder, an air freight forwarder, or an integrator. An integrator, different word, but that means that's like the FedEx, UPS, where they do pickup, trucking, they do air freight, they do a lot of different things, but they can do it all in one. A post office is also an integrator. When you ask, let's say you want to think about ocean forwarding, you can call Matson. Matson, unfortunately, most of the people in their customer service, they only know domestic shipments. When you get to international and you want to get some specifics, they do have a contract. First of all, they'll probably send you to the Phoenix office, which is a lot bigger. Then they'll send you to another lady that's on the contract. She lives on the Big Island, and she gets, I've talked to her, but she doesn't get too many calls for small things, because most of the time you'll be shipping via air freight. And on these things, you can see, I gave the people here some pages because I'm not going to put everything together. But here, when you talk to a freight forwarder, make sure you ask the same thing. You know, like explain your rates and service. Don't forget, rates and services, again, we mentioned before, one is units of measure. Per kilogram versus per pound makes a big difference, so you have to make sure you understand that. Also, whether it's in yen or dollar, things like that are very, very important when you discuss or negotiate pricing. What are the additional charges? There can be a whole lot, and I'll go through them in the presentation. Are there any discounts if you're shipping regularly? Okay. And how much is the insurance and what it'll cover? These are air containers. The one in the middle is the largest one. It's on the upper deck of a 747 or 747, 787, 767 freighter. And instead of passengers, they have a whole level, and I'll show you photographs of that. But then the rest are containers that can go under the belly of a passenger flight. And these are shots. This is the interior of a cargo-only aircraft, a wide-body service. It's pretty large. These are your integrators. Okay, this is important. Shipping rates, ocean and truck rates are partially regulated in the US. It's very regulated in foreign countries. So you have to really be aware of that. The other side is, let me go back. Air freight in the US has been deregulated. We're not regulated, and since the 70s. Prior to 1970, the Civil Aeronautics Board controlled a lot of things, rates, tariffs and rates, also controlled what carriers can fly. And at that time, into Hawaii, there were only a handful of domestic carriers. United, Northwest, Pan American, and then after in 1970, when they deregulated, every airline started to come to Hawaii. And with that comes competition. And because of that too, rates are negotiable. It's not set up because you can't set or fix rates. Rates can be directional. This slide here, directional, and driven by demand and available space. On that too, the flights coming in from Japan or from Korea or from Asia anyway, for the most part, we have very little tourists coming in. The top deck with the passenger is empty, but the cargo load is full. Comes to Honolulu and is being transferred to a domestic carrier. If somebody needs to get somebody to Chicago, Dallas, San Francisco, LA, Washington, D.C., from here, Honolulu has flights nonstop to some of those destinations, and they're willing to take some of that. So a JAL flight coming in has probably 20% capacity of passengers, very empty. But the cargo load is full, and they transfer all the containers to these domestic carriers. So that's always important. The same token, well, charged by actual weight or dimensional weight, we'll get into that the next slide, but the density, the more, if you buy a container, there aren't no container rates to Asia by air, only by ocean. But if you have, and I'll just add this on because if you're gonna have a container rate, we do have to the mainland. And the denser the cargo, the more you can get. Maybe a container like an LD3 can fill 3,000 pounds of cargo, but then you can't fit 3,000 pounds if your stuff is fluffy. But if you have dense cargo, you can get, and your price per pound really drops. So anyway, they have that. The specific commodity rates pretty much has gone away, number 5. That used to be for certain products that they wanted to entice, like fruits and vegetable, live fish, things like that had specific commodity rates when you didn't have enough to fill a container, but the rate per pound had a special rate. And anyway, the number 6 is how fast you want it. Some carriers offer deferred service. It might take 3 days to get from LA to Honolulu, but you get a price break. Ship-loaded containers, of course, it's something that when you buy a container, you have to load it and you have to unload it, or pay somebody to do that. Shipping dangerous goods can be simple, like hairspray. That's a compressed gas, and you have to make certain documentation, so it might cost you more. And of course, keep track of the current fuel and security charge, okay? And they will apply. And right now, the fuel charge is more than double the price per pound. And so you gotta keep that in mind, and it fluctuates. Now, this is another slide that's very important for you to not look at the detail, but I have the local, you have a copy of that on your the thing I passed out. But people in our industry, air cargo, they're going to charge you by actual weight or dimensional weight, and the dimensional weight is figured by how much space it takes up. The post office will take a piece, they go maximum 108 inches, but it'll be length and girth. The girth is around here and the length. only 108 inches max. Okay, and of course they have a weight limitation of 70 pounds. The other side is that we have FedEx, UPS, and the normal, formula for a U.S. air carrier or freight forwarder for domestic is 194. Internationally, they use 166. And what I want to explain is that you take your length times width times height, all in inches. You multiply that up, and you do that for all the boxes, and then you divide by 166 if you're going to Japan. And then that'll come out, if that's the answer for that comes out more than the actual weight, you're going to be charged by that weight. On the other hand, FedEx, UPS, they don't use 166. They use a different amount. It's less, I think 143. So you got to be careful. Just to give you a story. There was a customer that I was trying to get back, and this was a domestic company from the mainland to Hawaii, but I guess it will relate to international too. But she says, I'm getting 50 cents a pound. What is your rate? And I said, 50 cents a pound, that's crazy. My rate at that time was $1.20. And it says, oh, you too, I don't want to talk to you. So I said, well, I can't imagine anybody charging 50 cents. Does it have the fuel, security, pickup, delivery? Mine includes everything. They said, oh yeah, I got them all. I'm getting 50 cents a pound. I said, well, I wouldn't want to lose it. So what happened was that I offer auditing services. I can audit your bills. About 6 months or 5 months later, she became president of an association that my company belonged to. So I met her at one of her first meeting. And says, hey, Brian, you want to still audit my bills? I said, oh, I'd be glad to. Says, okay, make me a copy of 1 month's worth of shipping. And that 1 month had 5 shipments. And anyway, so I went down, picked up the copies, went back to my office, calculated it all up. I went back, same day, 2 hours later. And I said, you know something? If you had given me that 5 shipment at my rate, I would have saved you from what you used with this other national company. It's a big company, international company. You would have saved $5,000. And she goes, no way, I'm getting 50 cents a pound. Yeah, but 50 cents plus pickup and delivery is additional. You're going to pay the fuel, security. Everything else came higher. But the biggest difference was this dimensional weight. We use, I told you, domestically, any number you divide by 194. That company uses 94. When you divide 94 into something, it's going to happen more. So her chargeable weight was humongous. And even if her price per pound was a little less, they charged her for the volume. $5,000, I told her. She said, no way. You could have a heck of a Christmas party this year. And then she said, wait, she called the sales rep for that company. And I can hear him saying, and I know everybody in our industry, so he said, I told you, but people don't listen if they say they just heard 50 cents a pound, forgot about everything else. So this is important as far as trying to figure out what your chargeable weight is. That's why I wanted to talk to you too. Packaging is important. We shipped stuff in where it was bulky. And then what happened was that the shipper puts it in a box. Like if you buy shoes, we ship internationally a lot of slippers and sandals. If they all came in each box, you know how a box with a sandal is in, it's bulky. That company, we taught them, don't ship the boxes like that. Put generic boxes, flatten them all up, send that in a separate box, and the sandals, bag it. We ship about 4 or 5 containers. These are the air containers. It's about 60 inches high, 48 by 40, 6 a week to Japan. Big savings because now it's compressed and then you're not paying for the space, the dimensional weight. So anyway, things like that, you should know how to package. And if you go to Asia, packaging is very important. What's eye-catching can be a big sales point. Okay, I'm not going to go into this, but Incoterms, when you do your deals, your sales pitch, it's important. One is to get the best rate. The shipment for that should be prepaid, meaning that paid on the U.S. side, because I mentioned we're not regulated. So if you pay on this side versus pay at freight collect, they're going to charge you the book rate plus a service fee for collecting on the behalf. But coming this way, just imagine we have these, I told you about these flights coming in with cargo, going back empty. Because of the freight going back empty, the carriers are all asking for cargo. They want to negotiate pricing. So we get really good rates. Believe it or not, what we charge our customer going from Honolulu to Tokyo is less than going from Honolulu to Los Angeles. It's hard to imagine, but that's why when you go to Japan, they say, no way. People just say, no way. One of my customers says, don't tell my competitors I'm buying from Hawaii. And who are your competitors? I want to go meet with them, you know. But the point is that it's something that it's hard to sell because people can't imagine. Our price from here to Tokyo is cheaper than flying something from Seoul, Korea to Tokyo, you know, because of the empty bellies of these big jumbo jets.
Before you switch, just stay on this topic for 1 second, Incoterms, because I think our people who are new to exporting need to understand this Incoterms. And so I just looked it up and I haven't heard, I was trying to figure out what does that acronym mean, Incoterms, and I haven't had to know that since business school, but it's short for International Commercial Terms, are a series of predefined commercial terms published by the International Chamber of Commerce relating to international commercial law. So what happens is every several years, the International Chamber of Commerce gets together. All of these countries come together with their representatives and they redefine the Incoterms. And the Incoterms you'll see are very common are XWorks or EXW. There's usually a 3-letter code for these various Incoterms. EXW, FOBs, freight on board, and CIF. Those are sort of the 3 main ones. Wouldn't you agree that those are
Yes.
sort of the 3 main ones?
Yes.
And so that's the relationship that you have with your buyer, and it determines really transfer of risk along the way. So XWorks is the most simple as a seller. That means the customer is arranging for the shipment from your dock at your building at your company all the way to them. So for you, that's the easiest thing. For the customer, it's more complicated. So the customer might want you to provide the goods to the airplane or the goods to Japan airport, for example.
Right.
So they might say the port at Narita, the port at Haneda. If you're shipping by ocean, it could be the port at Shanghai or something like that. And then they take it over. They remove it from the ship and they do the customs and all that stuff. So it's very important to understand this along the way and understand your Incoterms with the customer, because all of those steps in the logistics process, there's costs. And so if you're responsible for the duties coming into China, for example, or the duties coming into Japan, you have to build that into your cost. Whereas if you were to just say, my terms are XWorks, that means you pick it up from me and I wash my hands of it from there. That's the easiest possible thing. However, as we learned from Elizabeth Chan's talk, this is part of the negotiation. The customer might say, hey, wait a minute, I'm the customer, I'm calling the shots here. So what I'd like you to do is give me a freight quote from your door to my door in Tokyo. That's a totally different thing. You might say, well, okay, I'll do that, but then you really have to get somebody like Brian involved to make sure all of those steps along the way are covered. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's very good points. What happened is that I mentioned to you that prepaid shipments get the best rate. Now we have, when you say pick up from your docks, I have customers in Japan that actually want, because they buy from several places, so they buy a merchandise and they tell that person to bring it to my docks. We consolidate it. And then it has to be prepaid, and maybe there will be 5 suppliers. And what happened is that we call the guy, I mean, that we have so much, the freight's gonna cost so much, we already figured that out. He'll give us a credit card, and then we go ahead and push the credit card through, and it passes. And then we ship it out. That way it's prepaid. On the other hand, if it's not, it's a little more difficult for you, the supplier, but then if you're a regular supplier, it's really easy to figure out the cost. And then the biggest thing is that when it arrives, we leave the buyer in that foreign country to do the customs clearance, the delivery to them and all that, because they probably order from other places. They can consolidate their pickups from the carrier or the ship or whatever. So Incoterms are important how you negotiate the prices. So keep that in mind, okay? I can go through a whole bunch of stuff, but then some people charge a documentation charge. Again, I mentioned about pickup and delivery, that's added on. There's handling charges and customs clearance fees. Some shipments, if you have a certain value, you have to be pre-cleared by the U.S. Customs to be able to export it. And usually it's $2,500 for a particular item or more. Agriculture inspection fees, phytosanitary certificates. There's all kinds of things. One of the things that got me surprised, in Tokyo, for instance, when you ship shipments, they have a handling charge at the Narita airport. They charge $1.70 per piece. Okay, so we might ship 90 boxes of chocolate candies, and then they're going to charge 90 times $1.70 $1.70 rather, times 90. But what we do is we shrink wrap it, and on the airway bill, we put down one piece, and a description, one pallet to contain, that contains 90 pieces. They're going to charge only $1.70 for the one piece, because that's what it says on the air bill. And so by doing so, it saves the buyer some money on that too. So anyway, things like that, it's a matter of knowing, and for you folks to find out when you do talk to that buyer and the potential buyer, we got to find out if that airport, and it's not all of Japan, only that specific airport has a handling fee. It's probably a contract with the handling agent there, but other airports don't have that fees. And don't forget at the end, pounds versus kilos, very important, okay? I'm just going to say this picture is the Greenpoint Nursery at the island of Hawaii. I'm just going to mention some things that, it started off good. There are a couple of their buyers from Japan, and they wanted to buy these small little bouquets, 3 flowers, 2 greens, 5 pieces per bundle. And then so they provided them samples, pricing for doing all of that, and they went back to Japan. And they said, terrific. And they were representative of, I forget the name of that company, it's a 7-Eleven in Japan. So we thought, hey, we got a good sales. I was there because I speak Japanese, so a little bit, but enough to explain. They came back, they says, we're gonna buy it, but we want 10,000 bouquets per week. They have no way of getting 10,000 bouquets of that anthurium. It was a terrific buy, but they said, we gotta supply 170 something 7-Eleven stores in Tokyo alone. We can't just sell it to some of it. Anyway, it was a nice thing, but it didn't happen. This is another show. Again, we mentioned about going to trade shows. This was in Beijing, the first China Hotel and Food Expo. The photo on your top right is the French Gourmet. It's a success story I'm going to mention. They started off using us to ship boxes of frozen with dry ice to bakeries throughout Japan, Hong Kong, and the mainland. But what happened was that they were in the basement of a small factory on 4th Street Mall, because being in the basement, it's cooler down there. They went to this show. First of all, I shipped all their products frozen to Beijing. We had it stored at the show, and we had D-bed and DOA. It's a huge show, 5 stories or 5-story building. And so Saturday, Sunday, we were trying to set up, and we had made arrangements for the next door hotel to bake these frozen dough. So here I am with the forklift trying to get past and go next door. There's a security guard says, you can't take anything out. But he brought in an interpreter, and the guy says, hey, this isn't a foreign trade zone. It's not passed, they haven't passed through customs. You can't take anything out. Oh, we're just gonna have it baked and brought back. You can't do anything. So here we are saying, what the heck? What we're gonna do? We have these samples over there, all frozen. In dismay, we went back to the 5th floor. The US pavilion was the whole 5th floor. Went up there, what happened was, I saw this guy selling pizza oven. And I'm going, hey, does this work? He says, well, it can. We just need propane and something to bake. Okay, so I say, I have something to bake. Propane, I'm sure you can get it. He says, yeah, we can get it. It's all around. We can get it. So that was Sunday. Monday morning, 7 o'clock, the show doesn't start till 9. We want to go set up. Over there, like you see that slide, he had samples. The aroma from the place that was baking it, all the way down from the 1st floor, you can smell it. Just follow your nose to the US Pavilion. That place was terrific. And we ended up, that was the best booth. The Hawaii booth was so popular. We had lines snaking around the whole 5th floor trying to get samples. And from there, next thing you know, they bought a property on Iwilei. They had a state-of-the-art where the thing would come down this thing. By the time it gets to the bottom, it's all frozen, boxed, put into a freezer container. That lady on the left, she was a rep from Hong Kong. They promoted her to be area rep. They shipped everything to Hong Kong, and from Hong Kong, she was distributed to all parts of China, whatever. That place in Iwilei lasted only a little while because they're shipping it full container loads going to Asia. But the ships weren't, on a regular basis. It might take 1 month to get there. What happened was that they ended up moving to the mainland, to Nevada, make the facility over there, same thing, put it on a boat, and then there's so many more boats going to Hong Kong, less, the cost was less. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff to go. And since Jamie is back, I wanted to ask her, can anybody go to, let's say you have the gift show, how can a non-participant get in? Because you need a ticket to get in, right? So can they get it from you folks to go and visit?
We can arrange.
Okay, she says that.
You just walk the floor.
Right, rock the floor. She said they can arrange for you to get into this thing, because I'm saying that if you know what your competitors are or who your competitors are, it's really important. I go to a lot of the shows, but I got set back because I figured I can wine taste. There's wines all over the place. So can I taste? You need a special badge. So you got to be an official wine buyer, so I wasn't able to do that. But it's important to go have their signage or your brochures in the language. And this is Neil Arakaki. He's with Hawaiian Candies and Nuts. But he brought the muumuus and those flower lays for the interpreters. And as a matter of fact, he does contract with the DBED and DOA to do all these presentations at these different shows. This was an interesting story. It's just a bromeliad. Bromeliad is a family of the pineapple, and this 5 people from Okinawa came into town, and then they went straight to the Department of Agriculture. No one spoke English, so the Department of Agriculture called me up. Brian, you can speak English, right? Come on down right away. I was there in half an hour in the Keamoku Street address, and then they said, I asked them what they wanted. They said, we want to find these colorful plants. They have a park in Okinawa that you can drive in a golf cart. And then it's all bland because it's just fields of pineapple. They wanted to show the colors of the pineapple family, which was these bromeliads. And so you can see all the colors. It was a big difference, and people started to ask. And, we took time out. I work with a supplier in Hilo. He's a hybridizer. And as a matter of fact, he's going to be speaking in Florida in this summer. He's an internationally known hybridizer of this kind of thing and this kind of plants. So anyway, after about a year, and I took him to the farm in Hilo. They said, this is what we want, this is what we want. So he says, how many do you want? And he says, well, can we get 10,000 plants? And the guy goes, no. He says, how much can you get? I said, well, in 3 months, I could probably get you 2,000. And these have to be bare rooted. No roots are not allowed in Japan. No dirt, no bugs, nothing. So he ended up doing it, the first 2,000. Then right away after they received it, said, can we get another 2,000? Then after 1 year, they called us up and the guy told me, can you and the supplier and his wife and your wife will pay your trip to Okinawa? In their anxiety or shipment excitement, all the tabs of the names of these plants, they lost them, they dropped it out. Here we took time out to put the names on the plants. By the time we got there, fell out. So they want us to go and identify because people were asking. You know, they take the charm and then they say, oh, what is that, what is that? They want to know. So anyway, that concludes my presentation. But for you, do you have any questions? Do you have any? Rob, I don't see anything.
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment again that I see this constantly along with, we talked about earlier, the intellectual property, that our Hawaii companies are not spending enough time on that upfront, and logistics. I just feel like our companies wait until the last minute to get somebody like Brian involved in their process, and they find that you know, because of shipment reasons or what have you, the packaging has to be changed or this has to be changed. They get a nice order from Japan, but they wind up losing money on the deal because they bleed a lot of money away on various logistics issues and what have you. And I just feel like as soon as you can in the process, get Brian involved and show him what you're trying to ship, show him the box, the packaging, everything. And he can save you a ton of money.
One other thing that I want you be competing against, for instance, cut flowers. Every week, cut flowers, not as much as they used to because we're having international competition. Anthuriums are coming from the Netherlands. The Netherlands pays for an inspector on site I think they have 2, and they rotate them every 6 months. But they pay for the pre-inspection, so it's not inspected in Japan. We used to do that with papayas. They don't do that anymore. But flowers, they wanted us to do it. And we could do it, pay for the certification and everything else. But the point was that it goes to Ota Market in Tokyo, to one big buyer. The buyer has his favorite so-called people that place orders. I was down in southern Japan, in Fukuoka, and also for a trade show there and in Hiroshima. And I was telling you that you folks are getting, because when I took the samples, they're going, wow, is this new variety? I said, no, it's not new variety, it's old variety, but you're getting your orders from Tokyo. When you order from them, they're limited because they're only giving you, I would say, leftovers. And in Japanese, no korimono. And so anyway, I told them, yeah, but we like to order from them because the salesperson comes down and wines and dines us, take them out and spend $1,000 for dinner. I said, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to save you money on your product. And that's the hardest competition we have, to try to sell against Japanese companies that do that. And but then if your product is worth it, one of a kind, there are people all around the world looking for your one of a kind product. We had a group, Reverse Trade Mission, came in from France, and we had a show and all the different Hawaii products, and they said, this is great. We want to buy 2 containers load every couple of months. The problem was that to get an ocean container to France, it took forever. And then when I checked on the pricing, I actually worked with Matson and at that time Sealand. It was really difficult to get a container load at a cheap price that they wanted. But the market or the buyers are there. It's just that sometimes the logistics is what might kill the project, if anything, because we're in the middle of the Pacific. But Asia is a good place to go, Asia, because we do have all those flights, empty flights, that can go back and take your products there. So, okay, thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much. Aloha. We can start in here with international marketing. Marketing for Exporters 101. The speaker is easy to introduce because that's me, Rob Hack. My company's the Asia Sales Manager. A little bit about me is it's quite easy actually, because essentially I've been doing the same job for 30 years, which is selling US products primarily into Asia, largely technology products, but during my career, all kinds of products and services selling in Asia. During my career, I've been based in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, Beijing, Hong Kong, of course, Honolulu, and even San Jose, California. What I'd like to jump into, we tend to talk about Asia at the Hawaii Pacific Export Council simply because that's what most of our Hawaii companies are interested in from a geography standpoint and a cultural standpoint. That's where we're exporting to. And even more specifically, I think our companies are very interested in Japan. I don't always agree that that's where our companies should be looking at first. I think we have free trade agreements, the USMCA, formerly called NAFTA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, where it's just much easier to ship product from Hawaii to Canada and Mexico. The marketing is easier, even in Spanish for Mexico, than it is in Asia, but nonetheless, our companies tend to want to go to Japan first, and then maybe also Korea, Taiwan, China, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. So my career has been largely based on exporting to Asia. What I'd like people to take away from this slide is that we cannot think about Asia as a monolithic entity, that it's a bunch of different markets. I've listed just some of them here. These are the main ones, but they're all incredibly different. Even Hong Kong is really quite different from Macau. The Philippines is really different from Pakistan, and India is highly different from Korea. I mean, that's obvious, I think. Nobody really needs to know that, but I think I need to just bring it up to people and remind you that it's hard to say I'd like to export to Asia, because you can't do that when you're first starting out. You have to pick a market and decide which it'll be. This presentation will largely be focused on Japan, but you could use the lessons in here to go after any market. This is a cycle that I developed and trademarked some years ago regarding working with tourists that are coming to Hawaii, particularly from Japan, but it could be from anywhere. Nonetheless, we start off with marketing at the top with social media in the local language, so let's say Japanese, working on magazine ads potentially in Japan, but also here locally in Hawaii. The Japanese tourist buys the product, likes the product, takes it back to Japan, uses it themselves or gives it out as omiyage, which I'll be talking about shortly. And then we have some packaging inserts inside the packaging talking about the product, what have you. And then they reorder, and hopefully they reorder from pre-positioned product that we've put in Japan, and they're ordering from domestic stock that they can receive within a day or two, rather than having to wait for a shipment to come from Hawaii. And this cycle just repeats itself over and over. Okay, there's really two types of products or two types of points of sale for Hawaii-based marketers. And point of sale number one is in Japan, meaning your product is in Japan, they're buying it in Japan, maybe on Amazon or from a local distributor. It's going to be bought in yen, Japanese yen, and you're going to be dealing in the Japanese language. The second is point of sale when tourists are here in Hawaii and they're buying it on the street in a store, and it's a US dollar transaction and probably mixed English and Japanese. So when we're talking about marketing, we have 4 Ps: product, price, place, promotion. So what is the product? Let's define that. I think we have to do a lot more on this. I'm sure you would agree. Our Hawaii companies have to make the Hawaii part of the product fundamental to the marketing. Made in Hawaii, made with aloha. Secondly, we have to think about the seasonal discounts in Japan. We've heard of Fukubukuro at Ala Moana Center, but this is a big deal in Japan. Much of the Japanese market is still focused on sales and seasonal sales, Golden Week sales, summer sales, winter, autumn, et cetera. Our companies need to adjust to that and sell accordingly. Let's talk about omiyage. Now, omiyage, you've heard the term before, but it's more than just a souvenir. It's really a way for the tourists to get a product that tells a story about their trip. And they take it very seriously. They spend a lot of money on this, and they take gifts back to Japan to their family, to their coworkers, to their friends, to their neighbors. And it can't just be a little trinket. It has to really tell the story of the trip and what they got out of it. And the other thing I would say is in Japan, you cannot just give a gift like, let's say I bought this bottle of water. You can't just hand this bottle of water to somebody and say, look, I brought this bottle of water from Hawaii. It's great water, here, take it. No, it doesn't work that way. There has to be really nice packaging, and it has to be in a bag. Even if this was nicely gift wrapped, you still wouldn't hand it to somebody like that. It would have to be in a nice bag, and the bag is critical. If you go to a typical Japanese house, somewhere in the house is a little storage area with dozens and dozens of bags that they've received, and they're going to repackage it and give another gift to somebody else with these bags. But it's a critical asset for our marketers to have those bags with nice logos, and inside you can put some information about the product, discount codes, or anything that you'd like to put inside the bag so that the customer can eventually, whoever receives the bag as the gift, can see your information inside the bag and see how to reorder the product, perhaps with a QR code on there, and they can scan it and go get a discount or something like that. But I think we really have to spend a lot of time working here with getting our packaging fixed and ready to for a Japanese consumer to come in and buy that product and make it as easy as possible on them to buy the product from you. So Japan is by far the most complicated market in the world regarding packaging. I can't stress that enough. I use a picture. This young lady shopper here is a very typical sight on a Japanese street with lots of bags. These are the bags that I'm talking about. Now, these could easily be logoed with your product, with your product on here, showing what's inside, but you could have fillers inside these bags with that information there. The Japanese economy spends by far more than any other economy in the world per capita on packaging. And as I say here, it's over 1% of the gross domestic product in Japan is just spent on packaging. By the way, in this presentation, anywhere you see the blue highlights, these are hot linked. So I hot linked here to the Japan Packaging Institute for some information there. And again, I'll send this out by PDF later. A critical part of marketing is, and another issue I can't stress enough, is we have to segment the market. We already said you can't just say, I'd like to export to Asia. I don't think it's enough to even say, I'd like to export to Japan. You have to define who in Japan is your market, right? Today, there's approximately 126 million people in Japan. Not all of those people are going to buy your product. They're not interested. You could never make them interested in your product. Maybe a product like this cell phone, maybe you could, if you were Apple or Samsung, you could think my market might be 100 million of those 126 million, right? That's possible. But for the average company, a product coming from Hawaii, I bet your market size is less than 1 million, and it's probably more like 100,000 people out of all of those 126 million, right? Don't spend time, effort, and money marketing to people who will never buy the product, right? You need to find who is your target market segment and market to those people only, right? So that your messaging, when you're doing social media, you're building a website, you're sending an email, they meet you at a trade show and you have a brochure, all of the words there will sing to the people who are your target market segment. So let's just think about it practically. Everybody in the modern world, you wake up in the morning, you have your coffee, you sit down at a computer or on your phone, you look at your email. Probably 50% or more of those emails you don't even care about. You're just going to swipe them and delete them because it's junk mail or it's this or that, the other thing. But there are some of those emails where you think, oh, that's interesting. It's, you know, a company that I buy from. If maybe your hobby happens to be fishing, you get some emails from fishing groups or whatever. You think, oh, that's interesting. Let me read about that. However, your domestic partner, whomever people you work with, they would get that same phishing email and just delete it immediately because they're not interested in that, right? But that phishing email is singing to you. It's calling your name. And that's how you want your marketing messaging to be. You're singing the song that this target market segment wants to hear so that when you are talking to them, it's not interfering with their life. It's not competing for attention with anything else. They look at that message and think, oh yeah, I'd like to hear from Sue in Hawaii. What is she up to? What is that company up to? Okay, that's where we want to get. And so the more you can hone in on that target market segment, the better. So I just throw up, here's some demographics in Japan. Japan is roughly the same as the United States in terms of the amount of females to males. The one thing that's really interesting about the Japan market, but is also common in Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, China's getting there. As you just heard, that recently we had news that the China population shrunk for the first time. But these other Asian developed economies have been doing this for now 20, 30 years. They're shrinking because the population is not replenishing itself. And then on the other hand, genetically and because of good diet, people are living longer. So you have in Japan well over now 100,000 people who are over the age of 100, right? That's really remarkable, actually. We don't even come close to that in the United States. Nonetheless, there's a very aging population who are typically forced to retire younger than we might be in the United States. And maybe forced is too strong a word, but no, they do retire. Some government workers and others are forced to retire. But the point being that there's a big population of Japan who is older and living longer. And so what does that mean? Well, and they're active. They're not sitting at home sort of couch surfing all day. These people are very active. You go to Japan, you see them, they're everywhere. You're walking around, they're out all day long. It's called the Silver Generation. And there's a term in Japan, they actually use the English term of QOL as quality of life. And that's for these older people, say 65 and above, who are, that's like 40 million, 50 million people now, right? So from a Hawaii marketer's standpoint, I think we have a lot of products that could be used for them. Nutritional supplements, skin care, snacks, alcohol, all of these kinds of things are what that population wants. And so we have a great thing. The other thing I point out, of all of those 126 million people in Japan, 110% of those people are curious about Hawaii. There's absolutely no other market in the world like Japan when it comes to Hawaii. That there's no question that the Japanese, by and large, have an extremely positive attitude about Japan. So I'm just going to backtrack a second. When they see these logos on products, as I've said before, it's like throwing chum into shark-infested waters, okay? It's just great for our companies. Just some general idea here, too, about demographics. And I just point out that when you're looking at Asia, this just is Japan, but when you're looking at Asia, they have mega cities that we don't have in the United States. We have the New York metropolitan area. We have the Los Angeles metropolitan area. You could, I guess, say Chicago, potentially Houston. But when you're looking at Tokyo, the Tokyo metropolitan area is 27 million people, right? That's like all of New York and Texas and Florida or something, all in Tokyo. Right? So if you're marketing and you're advertising, you get a heck of a bang for your buck by working just in these mega cities. And so these are just some other cities, some of them you've never even heard of before. Kitakyushu's 1 million people, right? China, there's a list of cities over 1 million people. It's like, there's like 150 cities like that in China, right? So we don't have that here necessarily. And so my point being that you may find that you have different distributors in these different cities. You can't just think of, for example, I'd like to have a Japan distributor. That probably isn't going to work out. You probably need a distributor for the Tokyo area, for the Osaka area, and maybe some of these other cities on here. And so I like to flip it around, and I think in reverse, if you were a Japanese company and you wanted to sell your products in the United States and you were trying to figure out where would you go first, right? So if you're a Japanese person, what do you see on the news all the time? Well, you see New York, you see Los Angeles. Okay, so I'm a Japanese company, I'd like to do things in the US, so I'm gonna get a distributor. I'll get a distributor in Los Angeles. Now, does that Los Angeles distributor, what do they know about the New York market? What do they know about Miami? What do they know about Houston, Detroit, Seattle? Probably nothing, right? So it's the same thing. If you get it, you can't just say, I'd like to get a Japan distributor. It's probably not going to work out. You should say, I'd like to get a Tokyo distributor. And even more specifically, you should say, I'd like to get a distributor who can find me these 100,000 people that are really my market, right? But they're probably spread out in Japan, and so you should be thinking that way. Like, where are they, this market? And I know when you're first getting involved in exporting, you're thinking, well, that's very difficult to find out. It's not really. You go to some of these trade shows, you get out there, you'll find out within a year where are these customers in Japan or in Germany or wherever they are. But you'll figure out who they are, and you'll figure out, are these buyers mostly women? Are they mostly women over 40? Are they mostly women over 40 with a college education? Are they mostly women over 40 with a college education and one child? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can get really close to what your target market segment is pretty quickly. Okay. I say you need to do research, you need information, you need to get out there, but there's no better way than to use these trade shows to get into the market and see what's going on. Through the DBET and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture pavilions, you can get into these trade shows extremely cost effectively, and I highly recommend doing that. Even if you don't get into the pavilion, as Brian alluded to earlier, you could still go to these trade shows and walk around. And then don't limit yourself to just the trade show. I've met many of our Hawaii companies who go to these trade shows. This trade show starts on Wednesday, they go in Wednesday morning, it finishes Friday afternoon, they go to the airport and come home on Friday night. I don't think that's the best approach. They should hang out for at least a few days, walking around the city, going to malls and markets and seeing the packaging and seeing the pricing and seeing how things are done there. That's how you get a flavor for what's going on. So please get involved in the market. We covered product. Let's talk about price. When you are working on pricing, this is our second major P of the 4 Ps in marketing. You have to look at all of these other topics here other than just what it costs to manufacture the product, because we've talked about packaging, labeling. You'll probably have to get labeling done in Japanese, shipping, insurance, tariffs. Brian can help you with those kinds of things, but nonetheless, it costs more for insurance and tariffs and things like that, shipping from Honolulu to Tokyo than it might be from Honolulu to Oregon, for example. Shipping, as Brian said, it could actually be more reasonable to ship it, but you definitely have insurance and tariffs and then local transportation in Japan that is different from Oregon or Kansas or wherever. Testing and licensing, this is very important. Looking at a market like Japan, I would say generally speaking, the Japanese version of the FDA is pretty stringent compared to the US. Not that the US FDA isn't stringent, but particularly with food products coming in, I would say that Japan is more stringent than the USDA or the FDA, depending on the product. Another interesting thing I found is that many of our Hawaii companies produce skin creams and cosmetics and some really fantastic products that Japanese consumers want. However, those products fall under the Japanese version of the FDA, and it's incredibly stringent on the types of ingredients that can be involved. We have companies in Hawaii that sell prepackaged cookies and things like that that use preservatives that are common and allowed in the US market, but in Japan they're absolutely verboten. And so once they try to sell these products in Japan, they can't. And so we have to adjust for that. So we have to get the products tested and licensed to go into Japan. It would be the same if you're sending them to the EU or elsewhere. But I found that for some of our products from Hawaii, Japan is really strict. Now, is that impossible or insurmountable? No, definitely not. We have a lot of very successful products from Hawaii doing well in Japan. I just want you to know about it. And you have to amortize all of those testing and licensing costs into your pricing to make sure that it's covered when you actually sell the product. Then depending on your distribution, you'll have to pay commissions and build in commissions to agents and distributors in your pricing. And then I think too, I see that many of our companies in Hawaii have not thought out the warranty claims and this sort of thing for a product that maybe the customer doesn't like. How do they return it? How do they get a replacement? What have you? So if you're having to replace a product, say you shipped some skin cream from Hawaii to a customer in Japan and it arrives and the jar is cracked or whatever, could have happened. How do you replace that? And then do you FedEx them another jar of cream? And right there you're looking at, I don't know, a couple $100 just to replace a jar of cream. So think about this stuff ahead of time and amortize all of those potential warranty costs into the cost of the product up front. I just jump into keeping an eye on foreign exchange rates. Right now, the Japanese yen is what, about 130, something like that, give or take, 130 Japanese yen per dollar. Just a month or so ago, it got almost to 160 per dollar. When I was starting my career in Japan around 1990, it was around 80. yen per dollar. So what that means effectively is that for $1, I could have gotten 80 yen. And now if I go to Japan, for $1, I could get 130 yen, right? That means my US dollar goes much farther in Japan. On the flip side, as exporters, we're really concerned about that because it means for 100 Japanese yen, they're getting much less US dollar value than they were before. The bottom line is right now, your products from Hawaii based in US dollars selling in Japan feel extremely expensive to the Japanese. So that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen a massive tourist rebound, because when they're looking at hotels and food and rental cars and things like that in Hawaii, it seems egregiously expensive to them when they're looking at visiting Korea, for example, as an option, or just going on vacation with inside Japan. And that's something we need to do. So we need to keep an eye on these foreign currency rates. There's not much you can do unless you're going to continuously price your products in Japanese yen. That could be really difficult. If you pre-position products at Amazon Japan or Rakuten or some warehouse in Japan, you could conceivably have a fixed Japanese yen price, which your Japanese customers would love. However, let's say they're coming to your Hawaii-based website and you have a yen conversion on there that's taking your US dollar price and just converting it to yen. There's been a huge fluctuation in the price. So if they would have bought the product in December, it would have been really expensive, super expensive. Whereas today it's just really expensive. But before the pandemic, when it was around 100 or 105, 110 yen, it kind of felt more reasonable to them. Anyway, this is something you have to pay strict attention to when you're exporting, is what is the currency rate for the target market that you're going to. I would say also, compared to when I first started my career in international sales, that you have companies now like PayPal and these online transaction companies that make things so much easier than in the past. It used to be that all of this was done by wire transfer and what have you. So there are a lot of technology solutions out there that are making exporting a lot easier than it used to be. This is just a graph of the yen. Look, you can see in the late 60s and early 70s, it was as much as 350 yen per dollar. When you're giving price quotes and terms, when Brian was speaking, we talked a little about terms, and that's Incoterms are included in these terms here. But when you're giving price quotes, try to do as much of this in the Japanese language as possible. Know the local terms that are normal in your industry. For example, do you get 2%, 10% net 30 type of payment? Possibly using letters of credit. If you've never used a letter of credit before, that's not complicated, but it's more complicated than just a credit card transaction, and that's done with your bank. Do you take credit card for payment? Remember that you'd have to build in the commission to the credit card company into your pricing to make sure. That can be 2.5%, 3% for Visa or MasterCard and 4%-ish for American Express. Then you have to think about, will I accept JCB, which is a major Japanese credit card that we don't have here, or some other credit cards that might be in China and elsewhere. One thing I found that's pretty common when dealing with Japan and other parts of Asia are the staggered payments, and it's pretty typical that the customer would pay you 40 or 50% payment to get the order going, and then another 40% on shipment or on delivery, and then a final 5 or 10% after they've received the product, tested it, checked it all out, and then they send another 10%. Don't be surprised if customers ask you for that kind of staggered payment, but make sure you can handle that. You know, maybe for your production purposes, 40, 50% upfront payment isn't enough, and you need 70% because you have to pay your suppliers of raw materials or workers or machinery or what have you. But understand that ahead of time. Some of our products coming from Hawaii need some after-sales service. That's a common term in Asia used in English, after-sales service. We don't say that phrase very much in American English here, but it's a common term, after-sales service. And essentially, you know, does the product need any help once it arrives? Are there setups? Is there spare parts that are needed, et cetera? Most of our products coming from Hawaii don't need this, but nonetheless, it kind of feeds back to that warranty claim. Even if you're selling skin cream or Aloha shirts or what have you, what happens if you do get an Aloha shirt that arrives in Japan and all the buttons are misaligned, and how do you replace that? And just sending a quick replacement by, emergency replacement by FedEx or something like that, like I said, it's $250 gone just like that, besides the cost of the material and what have you. So try to understand that ahead of time and plan for it ahead of time. Shipping, I won't cover this because, as I told you before, we just heard from the godfather of shipping. So there's nothing more I can add here other than beating, again, that point of Incoterms and knowing the Incoterms that you're working with your customer, making sure you're both singing from the same sheet of music on that. Shipping from Hawaii to Japan can be expensive, but that's why I strongly suggest getting a freight forwarder involved, calling Brian and getting him in there and talking about it. Most of our companies are going to be shipping by air until they get into much bigger quantities and, you know, several pallets or full 20-foot or 40-foot containers that can go by ocean. I would say 90% or more of our companies that are just getting into exporting are going to be shipping by air. So it's good to understand what's going on there. Again, I did this was a client I was working for a few years ago before the pandemic, and we came up, these are actual numbers from them, and it's showing the flat rate boxes from USPS, which can be a reasonable solution in some cases, depending on what you're doing. But you have to remember that if you're sending a lot of flat rate boxes, eventually Japan Customs is going to catch up with you, and they could make you pay back taxes on some of these shipments that you've been doing in the past. Nonetheless, it talks about shipping and getting the shipping costs down per unit of what you're trying to sell there. So the more you can ship at one time, generally, the cheaper it is. That's sort of common sense. It doesn't always work that way, but nonetheless, start working with your freight forwarder immediately, even if you're not ready to ship. Here's some logistics info here for Japan. We talked about product and price. Let's talk about place real quickly. This is something that our companies need to figure out when they're working internationally. So let's say in Japan, how are you going to distribute the product? So I use here the $sign as the amount of potential return here, but it's also the amount of potential cost, right? So you could hire somebody to live in Japan, somebody who already lives in Japan. It could be you. You could move to Japan and start selling the product. It could be a part-time person who's out pounding the pavement, knocking on customer doors, talking to trade show people, going to trade shows on your behalf, et cetera. Your employee effectively. Now, on my list here of potential distribution solutions, that's certainly the most expensive. You have the most control, though, And the potential reward is the highest because you will reap all of the benefit of their activity, of that person. Now, if you don't want to hire somebody, the next level down of that would be an agent. So you effectively are hiring somebody who also has other products probably similar to yours, and they go out and they represent several products to the customers. You may pay them like a retainer fee, which is less than a salary, and they would take some sort of commission. So we'll call that a sales agent. And a distributor typically buys the product from you, and you work together on marketing, and you would attend some trade shows. However, the distributor has most of the marketing activity under their bailiwick. They go out, they sell the product, and they stock it locally. It's less risk for you. However, the return is less too, because that distributor is taking a large chunk of any margin that is created in the transaction. Next to that, below that, we have a reseller. Reseller is the easiest potentially for you because like a distributor, the reseller is buying the product from you, they're stocking it in Japan, they're going out and doing all of the marketing, doing all of the trade shows, doing basically everything, and they just send you orders. Okay, that might sound great, but you actually have very little control of what's going on. You don't really know what's going on. They tend to isolate their suppliers. They want to have the reseller brand name out there. So it could be beneficial for you to have that kind of relationship, or it could not be beneficial. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And then, of course, it's always an option to say, I'm not going to do anything in that market. It's too expensive. I don't understand my target market segment, and it's just not worth it. Nobody's buying the product, and I'm spending too much on marketing in that country and what have you. So doing nothing is a reasonable solution, and you decide, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go to a different market. Nonetheless, I think most of our companies should be somewhere in the go direct agent distributor area. I'd like to see more of our companies somewhere around the go direct area. I think a lot of our companies could be successful doing that without as much cost as they think it would be. Here's just some major department stores and stores that I think our Hawaii companies would be interested in selling to, and I just created a small list here. These are major apparel stores, grocers, which you might be interested in later. So we talked about place, now let's talk about promotion. I believe a lot of our Hawaii companies have this wrong opinion about Japan, that English is prevalent in Japan. I think it has to do with the fact that there's maybe some tourists come here, there's some interaction with the tourists, and it's mostly done in English, so the local Hawaii population sort of feels like, I can go to Japan and I can get by in English. It's just not true. Our companies here, if they really want to be successful in Japan, they have to function in the Japanese language. And it can't be done with Google Translate, or I see Shopify, for example, is a very good platform, works extremely well. However, if you're building in the translation function to these types of platforms, they're using Google Translate or some other translation AI behind the scenes. And the translations that come across on our websites that are done automatically just are not cutting it in terms of grammar and punctuation and this kind of thing. So we have to be very focused on cleaning up our Japanese or whatever foreign language you're trying to operate in. And remember too, just like in English, just because you're a native English speaker, you might not be a very good writer. Your punctuation and grammar and spelling and things like that might not be very good. It's the same with any other language. Just because you speak Japanese natively might not mean you're a very good Japanese copywriter. So you really need to find somebody who can work well on that. I just put this app, I'm a big fan of, as I've been studying Japanese for so long, there's an app that's literally called Japanese. That's the logo of the app. I really like that. That app does a really good job of translating what we're trying to do. But still, you need a really formal translator to help you get your message across in Japanese. Kanzo Nara talked about this in detail, so I'm not going to get too into it. However, I do agree with him that you certainly need, if you're interested in the Japanese market, you need to look at Line. That's the major social media platform in Japan. I think that our companies here could do really well with Instagram, with good, nice, beautiful, colorful photos of Hawaii and the beach and the sand and your products in the sun, and I think that goes really, really well. Some Japanese language posts in social media I think are very helpful. You don't have to do everything in Japanese. You know, start off by 1 in 10 or so. 10% of your posts could be in Japanese. But just start it and get it out there. Yeah, Line I think is really important for Japan. And Instagram too. And I would also suggest for your website and having a YouTube channel with your products in small, short videos, I think is extremely helpful. Videos have a way of overcoming a lot of language barriers. And especially with our sunshine and the palm trees and all of that stuff, it's really fantastic effect showing your products that way. Just short, very quick videos that can be on YouTube, and of course you can use TikTok and other things like that once you have that little short video, but really a fantastic way to do things. This is just showing a Japanese survey on how satisfied they are with various social media platforms, and Line and Instagram are certainly the most popular. Okay, these are some short-term social media recommendations. If you're not at all familiar with it, companies like Hootsuite, Buffer, Crowdfire, Publer, there's several of these companies where you can type in your social media post and send it out to many platforms at one time. It saves you a lot of time and energy. You could look at something like that. This comment here, Nitsuite is sort of about us for your website. I think if you're serious about the Japanese market, you need to have at least that amount of Japanese on your website, right? Just one paragraph even under the Nitsuite that explains about you. I think that our companies in Hawaii who do really well in Japan, I say this all the time, but I believe it more and more every year, is the companies that can tell a story about themselves. It's usually the founders of the company or the people who are really involved in the company, managing the company. They started this company for a reason. Japanese consumers love to hear the story of the people behind the company, and photos and pictures of the factory and the products in the building, and building as much of your personal story into the product and the product marketing is extremely helpful. And I would love to see our companies doing much more of that. I think a lot of our companies feel, I don't really want to tell my story. It's not important. My story is not important. You know, they're very humble about it. And I think that that's just the wrong approach. I understand that feeling, but I think from a market standpoint, you really want to get it out there and get it in front of people. Now, I'm a big believer from a marketing standpoint of email and email newsletters, quarterly or monthly, but something regular that, again, is singing to the target market segment. You might hear my voice saying we send a monthly newsletter, you think, oh, customers don't want to hear it from me monthly. That's not true. I think if you really have your target market segment down and you're using the words that your target market segment wants to hear, monthly is perfectly fine, but at least quarterly. Then you need to start keeping a database of your contacts in Japan, and the database has to include their Romaji or their English Roman name, but you really need to keep track of their family name and given name in Japanese as well, because later when you have a Japanese employee or a distributor or what have you, you'll be able to transfer those names over to that person and help you with the marketing. Same with English. We have to pay attention to the fonts that we're using in Japanese or Chinese or whatever. But just like in English, everybody knows it used to be the default font was Times New Roman. But now that seems to have fallen away and people are using Calibri or Tahoma or what have you. Helvetica is the kind of the English or the Latin language default. But there's many others that you could use. And when you see that font, it's telling you something, a subliminal message about that company, right? If there's some funny fonts or comic book fonts or whatever, if your marketing literature was in that comic book font, that's saying a lot about your company right there. That you're younger, you're hip, you're cool, whatever term you want to use. But if you're using Times New Roman, it's saying, oh, this is a pretty traditional company. We do things a certain way. It's the same thing in Japanese. They have lots of different fonts that you can use. And your copywriter or the person that you're working with, you need to work with them to make sure that you're using the same sort of font consistently in your marketing literature. This is a sample of some of the email tracking software that you can use. So for example, this is a few years old, but nonetheless you can see, you can track what device did people open that email on, where were they when they opened that email, what time of day did they open that email, what link did they click on. That's all really, really helpful. And this is not expensive stuff to use MailChimp or one of these types of email newsletter providers. Getting customer relationship management, often just called CRM software. The huge one is Salesforce, but there's many others that you could look at. If you're a Gmail user, Insightly is good, in my experience. Certainly China's out of control with QR codes. You can't do anything in China now without QR codes everywhere. But Japan is a Japanese company originally invented the QR code. But I would say that your Japanese customers at trade shows, what have you, they're much more used to using these QR codes. And so what it would mean is they might have that on their business cards, on their marketing literature, what have you. You can scan the QR code and get all of that information about your contacts or your pricing or a website or what have you. It can all be built into that QR code. Another thing I would say for our new to exporting people is, when you're printing literature to take to a trade show, you're very likely using letter size paper, 8.5 by 11 inches in the US. Nowhere else in the world does anybody use that letter size. It's all A4. And you've actually seen A4 on your paper cartridge that you put into the printer. You just didn't know what it was for. But A4 is the most common letter size around the world, and certainly in Japan. The reason I bring this up is if you print something in 8.5 by 11 and you take it to a trade show, when that Japanese company, this is a typical thing you find in a Japanese office, these little plastic folders that are based on, this is an A4 size. When they take that 8.5 by 11 and they put it in here, it doesn't actually fit very well. And so our 8.5 by 11 standard letter size paper doesn't fit in Japanese file cabinets. And so what do they do when it doesn't fit? They look at it and they throw it away. All right, I don't want your literature to do that. So if you can, print it on A4. It's not easy to find A4 in Hawaii, but what you could do is just print your marketing literature in Japan at the site like Tokyo Big Site or Makuhari Messe, where a lot of the Hawaii pavilions might be. They actually have printers on site there that can do this for you reasonably inexpensively. But if you're working with a local agent or distributor, you can get these things printed virtually. There's a company that prints them and sends them to you, so it's actually much cheaper. Okay. Trade shows, I just think it's a great idea, looking at your competitors, looking at your packaging, and staying longer than the trade show and visiting local stores. Online retailers and distributors, Kanzo Nara talked about this, but Rakuten, Amazon Japan are extremely popular and getting more popular all the time. Mobile e-commerce, meaning your phone, making sure your website looks good and operates well on the mobile device. So just because it looks good on the computer doesn't mean it's going to look good on here when they're on a train. Your customers are on a train and they're trying to buy something from your website or look for information about the product. Make sure it looks good on the mobile phone. We talked about advertising on rush hour. I like this photo because this is just normal, right? People on their phones for an hour and a half or 2-hour commute. There's nothing else to do. If you just stand there and meditate, you know, that's about it. Otherwise, you have to look at your phone. I do it when I'm on the train or the subway or what have you. And so they could very likely be shopping. As you can see, there's all these ads here. People might look up and say, oh, that's interesting, and they find the website, and you know, this is a slightly old photo, but more modern. There might be QR codes, so you could scan the QR code and it takes you right where you want to go. Now, to put an ad in a Japanese subway like that is not cheap. I'm not suggesting our Hawaii companies jump into that right now, but nonetheless, you get the idea of what's going on there. You've seen these publications around. Again, they're great. They are read by Japanese tourists and Japanese consumers. Not cheap, but they are effective, and I think some of our companies can use these to their advantage. These are some versions of these magazines that are just in Japan. Where'd I go? These are the local ones here in Hawaii, and then these are the versions that are sold in Japan. They're usually really thick, and you know, it's $10,000 a month or more to put an ad in these magazines. But they're read. They're read. Some other ideas. There are some Japanese, let's call them Hawaii file Japanese people who write blogs, and if you can get in any of those blogs, that could be extremely helpful for you. It could be extremely helpful to have a Japanese telephone number that somebody can call during the Japanese business day. It's pretty cheap to set up with a company like Ring Central, or there's many others, in fact. However, the caveat is you have to have somebody who can answer the phone and answer it in Japanese. But I think it's a great, these are what I consider best practices. We talked a lot about knowing who your target market segment is, this sort of thing. I won't go through all of this because we've already gone through it in detail. But I think regular attendance at trade shows is a great way to get going. It could take 3 years or so going regularly. But if you go to just one trade show this year, you will come back with an infinite amount of knowledge compared to what you have now. I've set up phase 1 towards best practices in Japan. This is something you can start working on immediately and before you even really jump into the Japanese market. But these are easy, relatively cost-effective, or maybe even free things you can do to just get going. I strongly suggest setting up a Japanese email address and putting that on your website so that Japanese customers know they can email in Japanese and they'll get a reply in Japanese. Plan on going to a trade show, figure out which one it is, and then trademark your product in the US and Japan. Again, phase one towards best practices. Get some Japanese verbiage written by a good Japanese writer onto your website. Start some social media posts. Work on packaging and the omiyage bags. I think that that's really important. Develop a QR code. Work on your social media plan. How would you implement such a thing? Maybe magazines aren't for you right now and you skip that part, but work on this cycle and think about how could I pre-position my product in Japan so that it could be reordered locally and received quickly by the consumer who's ordering it. Here's some more resources here. And in Washington, some resources in Japan that could be beneficial to you. I can't stress enough the American Chambers of Commerce. Our embassy has Department of Commerce staff or agriculture staff who can help with agricultural products. Here in Hawaii at the Foreign Trade Zone, we have John Holman from the U.S. Commercial Service. He's a fantastic resource for you. Of course, the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, DBET, and others. That's it for me. Again, Rob Hack. Any questions? I'd like to just extremely quickly, I'm going to go through some cultural issues here. I have a finance presentation, but I'd skip that because we're having a whole finance seminar later this year where we'll cover all of that stuff in great detail, and do a better job than I could do it in a half an hour. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just do this cultural issues quick, just to give you some things to think about. Now, you could look at this cultural issues and say, well, that's sort of a soft topic, that's not really that important, the cultural issues. And I think if you go back to what Elizabeth Chan was talking about in the negotiation part and the legal part of the day, she alluded to it a lot, but I just see it all the time that there's a lot of... The more sensitive you can be to the local culture that you're operating in, the more business you'll do. Let's just leave it as that simple relationship. Is your cultural sensitivity will yield better results for what you're trying to accomplish. So it's no secret, you go to Japan, people like to bow. They don't shake hands. It's not normal for them. If they've worked and lived and done some things in the US or elsewhere, maybe they're familiar with it, but it's generally not done. I've seen a lot of our Hawaii companies, they go to a trade show, and Hawaii people are generally very huggy and arms around people and whatever. In Japan, it's just absolutely verboten. You don't get in somebody's personal space. I think that there's married couples who haven't been in each other's personal space in 40 years, I just see that all the time. So it's bowing, and, you just try, right? You don't have to have the perfect bow. There's ways to do it, but just try. Okay, so things to think about. Obviously, language. As I said earlier, do not get caught in the trap that you can use English in Japan consistently. And if you learn some Japanese and you just try it, it really opens things up, okay? But I think it's also showing respect for your customer by saying, on my website, I have put some Japanese language for you. My marketing literature, in my social media posts, I'm doing this Japanese for you. That's extremely helpful. Now, with business cards, that's really interesting because I think as Americans are not good at it. Believe it or not, they used to be. I mean, this is really an American tradition as the business card thing, but it went away after, say, World War II. But if you look at some old movies, you can see how they really did business cards very formally back then. And somehow it disappeared. But I see people handing out business cards. Our companies go to trade shows and they hand out business cards like this. They throw them on the table. And in Japan, that's just considered very, very rude. So there's a way to do it, you know, with handing over your business card and accepting a business card. It's a very formal process. It's not hard to learn, but just do it. Get used to it. And I found that my time in Japan when I was young and learning those sorts of things, it's become sort of formalized for me. And then when I do it in other countries like China or Indonesia or whatever, it's respected. Like it works well. So anyway, there's differences in the roles of males and females, right? We want to take our US culture and expect that to happen in Japan, expect that to happen in Vietnam or wherever. It just doesn't work that way. So just understand, keep your eyes open and pay attention and learn, and don't tell people, well, you know, in Hawaii we do it this way. In Japan, they don't care how you do it in Hawaii. You're trying to do business there, so try to do it as much their way as you can. I feel like a lot of the places I travel and work in have become pretty informal over the years, even more informal than the US. But there's still some places that are very formal, and I think Japan is one of those places that's still very, very formal. And you can't go wrong by having, as a man, a blazer with your aloha shirt, as Elizabeth had said, or as a woman with a dress and heels. I mean, you just can't go wrong. Jeans at a trade show, I might not, maybe black jeans or something that were really black, but you know, Japan's still quite formal in that regard, and the behavior amongst people, adults, is still very formal. Politics and this sort of thing, don't get involved in it. You know, it doesn't matter. We talked a bit about clothing. Do you bow? Do you shake hands? I put up this book because this is still like an Amazon bestseller after decades. Kiss, bow, or shake hands, and it gets updated once in a while. But I strongly recommend getting a copy of this book. I like it a lot, and it just has a chapter on sort of every country you could possibly go to, and it just gives you a primer on what the norms are for that country and how they do things. And it's not over the top. It's not saying you have to do this, you have to do that. It's just making some suggestions and saying this is the way to do things. But it's a nice way to read about how things are done in a certain country. Elizabeth talked a little bit about entertainment. I still find in Japan, Korea, some places like this that you do go out with your customers. I think maybe part of the southern U.S. might still be this way. Some industries are still that way, but in Japan, it's almost all that way. You should be expected to go out to dinners and drinks with your distributors and agents and customers. It's sort of a normal activity. And again, this is just sort of keeping your eyes open, learning about what's going on. I like it. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. I think that's really true. So these are different stakeholders that you need to be culturally aware of. What is their role in your process of getting the product from you to the end user? What is their role? And culturally, they might have different roles in Japan than they do here. So keep an eye on that. Watching language, slang. As Americans, we like to speak in slang a lot, things like right off the bat. And little things like that where everybody here knows what they mean, but when you're talking to your Japanese colleagues right off the bat, they don't know what that means. So just things like that, just keeping an eye on things. I feel like Americans, especially some, can be really gesture-oriented and speaking like that. You know, Japan, you won't find that at all. People keep their hands down. On the subway, I showed you a picture of the subway earlier. I guarantee you could hear a pin drop on that subway. Nobody's talking. Japanese elevators, it's just absolutely verboten to talk inside of an elevator. Whereas you'll see a couple of Americans get on an elevator in Japan, and all of a sudden it's like New Year's Eve at Times Square, you know, inside this elevator, and all the Japanese people are freaked out. So just things like that. But again, you got to keep your eyes open, your ears open, and looking around and see how other people do things. Yeah. Elizabeth talked about it, but I agree, bringing some gifts, having some gifts that you can give and take to people, small things. I'm not talking cash. I'm talking about little Japanese candies and things like that is extremely helpful. Chocolate-covered macadamia nuts and those sorts of things are fantastic. And also looking at things over the long term. You know, don't go to that trade show and expect, like, I'm going to get results from this trade show, from that buyer during this time. You know, you're thinking a year, 2, 3, 5 years out, you know, and you have to do things consistently and show up regularly every year. A good attitude is really important. You can never go wrong with smiling, just being positive. If you go to a trade show, you're in a booth, good positive attitude, you know, letting people see the products, not blocking the view of the products. I think, you know, that's a very brief overview. Again, this cultural issues thing could be a whole course unto itself for hours and hours and hours, and it depends very much on the market you're going to. But don't give up on it, and please just keep your eyes open and be open to new experiences and learn and have fun. Have fun with it. Okay, with that, I'd like to wrap it up. We're out of time and we're going to get kicked out of our room soon. So I hope that our online audience is still with us. Some of them are, so thank you very much for hanging in there with us. I'll edit this video during the next week and then upload it to our YouTube archive, and also DBET uploads it to their website. And I will make sure all the presentations are converted to PDF and sent to our live audience and to the online registrants as well. That'll take a few days. So thanks again for attending our Export University 101. Please check our website at the HawaiiExportSupport.com website for the schedule of this year's events. I think very quickly, before we wrap up, I'd just like to get on the record the websites of our colleagues who were generous enough with their time today to share their expertise with us. So let's see. We have HiSTEP at invest.hawaii.gov, and then there's an exporting tab here, which is where you go. This is the Hawaii Pacific Export Council's YouTube archive. And if you just go to YouTube and look for Hawaii Pacific Export Council, you'll find all of these videos, which go back several years now. We're approaching 100 videos of various targets of geographies and specific topics. So for example, here's a Taiwan, here's digital marketing for exporters. So we have lots of very specific topics here. Here's HPEC's website at HawaiiExportSupport.com. Elizabeth Chan was from the law offices of David F. Day. Here she is. And then she is CEO of this separate organization called the Global Risk Mitigation Foundation. Kanzo Nara from Imagine Web Creation, just a great asset that we have here in Honolulu for our Hawaii companies trying to do multilingual, bilingual websites and social media. Here's Brian Suzuki at Hawaii Air Cargo. I like this website. It's a U.S. government website at trade.gov, where there's a tremendous amount of information here that you can search for country-specific or industry-specific information. Here's John Holman I talked about. Here's the U.S. Commercial Service employee in Hawaii. He's here at the Foreign Trade Zone, and his information is here. And this is my website at theasiasalesmanager.com. Okay, fantastic. Again, thanks everybody. Thank Doug, thanks for your help. Jamie, thank you everyone. And we'll be back with you soon with an upcoming schedule for the 2023 cycle. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.